I'm Rosie Collier. I'm head of content at My Life Bills, and I'm here today with Elaine Harvey from Moving Minds. Elaine, can you give us a little introduction to yourself, please?
Certainly. Yes, my name's Elaine Harvey. I'm the director of Moving Minds. I'm a dance practitioner, artist, researcher, and lecturer.
And what is it that led you to set up Moving Minds?
Well, Moving Minds started around 10 years ago. Before it was even Moving Minds, it started off as a 12-week research project, and it wasn't really meant to be any more than that. I'd spent the last 30 years working in dance as a choreographer and a performer, and I'd started working more and more in different kinds of social and community contexts. And I was really starting to see what dance could do, how it could impact the lives of individuals and communities. And so 10 years ago, a colleague and I started it was only meant to be a 12-week research project that was looking at the ways in which dance could impact the lives of people living with dementia and their friends and family members as well, who were also part of the research project. And they came along to the university I was working at the time for 12 weeks. And at the end of the 12 weeks, the impact on those people was so kind of profound and undeniable that we didn't feel we could stop delivering those sessions. And the group of people who'd come to work with us didn't want the project to stop either. So it continued, and here we are 10 years down the line. We're still doing it, but Moving Minds is now a registered not-for-profit organisation, and we work in lots of different contexts. And we work alongside people who are living with different kinds of long-term health conditions, but dementia was our beginning, and it's at the heart of the work that we do.
I love this transformation from a 12-week research project into a 10-year-long mission. That's fantastic.
It happens.
Yeah. And what is it about dance and the way that it impacts our minds and our bodies that makes it so beneficial for people living with dementia?
Well, I think dance is unique in that it's one of the few activities that works on so many levels at once. So it gets us moving, thinking, feeling, connecting with each other. Physically, the impacts are well documented and researched. So we know that it improves almost every aspect of functional capacity. It improves strength, balance, coordination, flexibility. And all of those things are particularly important to maintain as we get older, when staying mobile and reducing the risk of falls becomes particularly important. But unlike other forms of exercise that can sometimes feel like a chore, dance is also joyful. So I think people are more likely to stick with it. And what's particularly special about dance is how it engages the brain. So you're not just moving, you're listening to music, you're remembering patterns, you're responding to rhythm, maybe interacting with someone else. And all of that activates different areas of the brain at the same time, including those areas that are to do with memory and spatial awareness and emotional processing. So research has shown that dance can help maintain cognitive function as we get older and reduce the risk of decline later in life. And there are other psychological benefits of dance as well. So dance gives people a way to express themselves without being dependent on spoken language. It can increase mood, lower anxiety, increase our levels of confidence, especially when it's done in a supportive group setting. And there's something really powerful as well about moving in sync with other people. It creates a sense of belonging and connection that's really hard to replicate in other settings.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It feels like exercise, but with so many other aspects added in, the sort of creativity, this communication, and this way of interacting with other people, even if, as you say, if someone struggles a little bit more with their verbal communication. As you mentioned, you started as a 12-week project, and now you've been going for 10 years. And how have you actually refined your process over those 10 years? What have been your learnings about how best to work with people living with dementia and how best to deliver those sessions most effectively?
Gosh, well, 10 years of learning, that's a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot to compress into a single answer.
Into one answer, it is. I mean, we've learned an awful lot. We've learned that supporting people living with dementia is not about delivering a fixed program or a fixed plan or a bag of tricks that we turn up with and do. It's about listening, observing, adapting, and evolving our practice. So we're always aiming to do that. Every individual's experience of dementia is different. So we've built our practice around responsiveness, relational care, and a deep commitment to personhood. I think one of our biggest lessons is around pace, actually. And I think in our early days, perhaps we felt that we needed to do more, do as much as we could, pack activities into sessions and achieve certain outcomes. I think maybe that comes from starting in an academic space. But we now understand through working in lots of different contexts that holding space very gently, offering clear and very personalized invitations to move, and allowing people to respond in their own time is far more powerful. So slowness, taking things slowly, can be a gift. And we've refined our sessions to allow more time for that kind of pace, for settling, for noticing. We can't facilitate or help someone to be present in their bodies and expressive and attentive if we haven't also developed that way of being. So we spend a lot of time, thinking about that in relation to ourselves as well as facilitators. We've also noticed how useful pattern can be and predictability, which doesn't mean that all the sessions are the same. They're certainly not. But we do use familiar structures, certain musical cues and gestures that help reduce anxiety and build confidence. So, for example, we open and close every session in the same way, often using a familiar piece of music or gestural sequence. And then that becomes kind of embedded in the group memory over time. And that helps anchor people, helps people living with dementia to orient themselves, even when other aspects of their day-to-day experience might seem unfamiliar. And I think musically, we've changed the way we work with music. We're using it much more intentionally, I think. I think we started off 10 years ago with the assumption that nostalgic music, and I use that term very loosely, would be the most effective, would invite a kind of more emotional resonance with the music. But we've also learned, particularly with people with more advanced dementia, that other aspects of the music, other than kind of narrative aspects, are really important. The atmosphere, the energy, the tempo, the mood, where sensory experience becomes more important than kind of narrative memory. So we use music in a slightly different way. I think we've really thought about the idea of inclusion over the years, and the way in which we can work with people living alongside a person with the dementia-related diagnosis, working with support staff, healthcare teams to ensure that our sessions are as accessible as they can be. But I think overall we've moved away from feeling like we are providing a service as such for or to people living with dementia towards the notion of co-creating dance with people living with dementia, working with people as creative, capable, expressive individuals who, deserve meaningful, joyful human connection. And everything we do is rooted in that understanding.
That's really interesting. And that was also a fantastic summary of 10 years worth of learning. Just by the way, I think you did a fantastic job there. Also really interesting because at My Life Films, we run a dementia-friendly streaming service. And there's definite sort of parallels with some of the things that you've mentioned there. Pace, definitely something we keep in mind with the productions that we make. So we have a set of quizzes, for example, and they're guided quizzes. So we have pictures that crop up or bits of music that help give people little clues to the answer. But the pace of that is really important. And striking the balance between giving people the time to kind of get to an answer, but whilst also not trying to sort of drag it out and getting them bored. And it can be a bit of a fine balance in terms of that pace, which I think is quite interesting. And also in terms of familiarity, wanting to produce new content that's interesting and exciting for people, but as you say, where they also feel comfortable and there's a sense perhaps of structure that helps guide them through the process as well. Yeah, there are interesting sort of tensions with both of those. Is that something that you found?
Absolutely. There's the desire, I think, as a facilitator to constantly introduce the new and the novel in order, I think, to maintain attention. But it's much more about inviting presence, I think, than maintaining someone's attention. And I think that's what dance does beautifully, is that it invites us to really sit with and be in our bodies, which for any of us with with or without a dementia diagnosis is really precious, and I think increasingly rare, within this very cognitive dominant society that we live in. We're constantly in our heads. So I think any opportunity to slow down and to have a real and immediate sense of our embodied self is very healthful and quite powerful and very precious.
We have a couple of dance sessions on our platform and also a chair yoga session where, again, we're trying to sort of encourage people to be in their bodies and to be moving, but in a safe way where they're not sort of at risk of falls as well.
Yeah, as you say, it is a balance, because a certain degree of risk, and perhaps risk is the wrong word, is important, or rather space, or perhaps we should say kind of space for something new to be experienced. I think that in the context of a condition that's sort of emblematic of loss, which is what dementia is really, that the idea of being invited to learn and to grow and to evolve and to do something new is really important. So it's kind of balancing keeping everyone safe, but also allowing people to have new experiences.
You touched on this slightly earlier, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit more on this point around creativity and what is the connection between creativity and our health and our well-being?
I think imagination, creativity plays a vital role in our health because it engages the whole person cognitively, emotionally, socially, physically in relation to dance. And there's growing evidence across discipline, from neuroscience to public health, that creative engagement can improve mental health, support neuroplasticity, and reduce symptoms of anxiety, depression, and even physical pain. So in the Moving Minds sessions, we use dance and the arts not just as recreational tools, but as kind of evidence-based interventions that foster agency, identity, and connection, particularly for people living with dementia, Parkinson's, people in recovery from stroke. So in these contexts, I think creativity is more than just a nice thing to do, a nice activity or a distraction. I think it can restore a sense of self. It can help people make meaning in response to life experiences that could potentially be fracturing. And it helps develop social bonds as well, which is also incredibly important to maintaining physical and mental health. I think creative health it's fundamentally relational. So participatory arts make space for co-creation, for empathy, for mutual recognition, all of which are vital to our sort of holistic sense of health. Yeah, so I think the arts should not sit on the periphery of healthcare. They're an essential part of how we can build healthier, more connected communities.
And it's interesting that you're emphasizing this element of co-production, actually, because we've recently set up a co-production panel to try and get input from people living with dementia and their carers into the content that we make to make sure it's as appropriate and as effective as possible. And I think that really is a really important part of that ethos, and making sure someone feels like they're part of something and that it meets their needs as well. And I think co-production is a really fantastic way of doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at every level, as you're saying as well, in terms of not just that moment of creating something together to create that output together, whatever that might be, whether it's a dance or a film or a performance, but actually co-creating the aims of a particular project. So we also have a steering group, an advisory group at Moving Minds, which is made up of people with lived experience of dementia, whether they have a diagnosis or someone who's living with and caring for someone with dementia. And they kind of advise and steer the project in all aspects, from content of sessions, aims of research projects, who should we make a piece of work with next, where should we make this film. They advise on our marketing, promotional literature as well. It's great to have that co-creation at every stage of a project, I think.
And do you have any favorite moments that you might be able to share with us from Moving Minds?
Lots. Two moments that come to mind, one from many years ago and one very recently in the past few weeks. So many years ago, we had a lady who was coming to the sessions with her son. I think she was in her early 90s and had dementia. She would make some sounds, but she hadn't spoken for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years at the point at which she started coming to the sessions. And we were in a session one day. We must have hit on just the right song. All of a sudden, she started singing, and there were all of these words, and she sang the whole song from start to finish. The atmosphere was palpable. The room just went very, very quiet and still. And for her son, who hadn't heard his mother's voice in a number of years, that was a really powerful moment.
It's incredible. Do you remember what the song was?
I think it was You Made Me Love You. It was really powerful. And then just recently, I mean, there are so many on a weekly basis, because what we see is people becoming animated, looking at their partner in the eye in a way that doesn't always happen in their day-to-day life, kind of connecting with them, finding ways to sustain their shared identity as a couple, which is also really important. But the other moment that comes to mind more recently is that we were working with a group in New York, and we were working with a local filmmaker to create a short dance film, which was about play and personhood, and the importance of play in forming and negotiating and renegotiating identity. So we went to the local theatre. They had a lovely studio space where we were filming this dance film. And a lady came into the space who struggled to move. In fact, she came in a wheelchair. She struggles to walk long distances. She came into the space in a wheelchair and then transferred into a seat. And we started the session seated, as we always do. We had a rail of props and costume, a really theatrical kind of pantomime sort of stuff, really fun stuff to try on and play with. And one of the things was a piece of fabric. It's sort of like a prayer flag, and it moves beautifully through the space. And this lady was handed this prayer flag, and a piece of music started, and someone helped her to her feet because she wanted to stand, to move in that moment. The music started, and all of a sudden she was off, and she was dragging this person around the space who was there to support her. And she was just in that moment. And in that moment, she didn't appear to have any pain. She didn't appear to have any limitation of any kind. In fact, she was dancing around that space in a way which was fully embodied and joyful and connected, and looking at everyone in the space and working with this prop that she'd been handed. And that was just a really immediate and powerful example of how capability can be extended through our relationship with other people, how we can do more together than we can by ourselves. But also it was about her being in relation to that piece of material she'd been handed, to the music, to the environment. So often I think what we do at Moving Minds is just create the right kind of environment.
That story's giving me shivers. I love that. That's really, really beautiful. Thank you for sharing those. And thank you also for speaking with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you.